Episode 72. 4 rounds of golf equates to 72 holes. 1972 is the year of birth of Jaromir Jagr, and the rule of 72 in finance states that you divide 72 by your annual rate of return to figure out the doubling time of your money. Beyond MD, episode 72, here we go! Hey everyone, welcome back to the Beyond MD podcast. While we're on episode 72, let's just say that number 72, Sergei Bobrovsky, had a chance to win his first Stanley Cup last night, so I'm recording this on Wednesday, June 19th, but Connor McDavid said no. That was an incredible game by Connor McDavid, and as somebody who lives and breathes the Penguins and worships Sidney Crosby, I will say, without a doubt, that Connor McDavid is the best player in the game today. It's not even close. That performance was unbelievable. So guys, I apologize in advance for my squeaky chair, which you will sometimes hear in the interview today. So I either need a new chair or I need some WD-40, but that is what we are dealing with today as we dive back into pensions. Now, I want to make one thing clear. I know that I have said before that I learn about topics that are of interest to me now. I re-explore pensions today in this episode because this is the year I'm entering my 40th year. Pensions may become a possibility sometime in my 40s. I'm not going to sign up for a pension just yet. As you also know, I am the type of person who really likes to learn about things in a lot of depth before pulling the trigger. But I do think pensions are interesting. And I'm not going to lie, ever since the proposal for the new increase in the capital gains inclusion rate went in, I've had pensions a little bit more on my mind, so I thought it'd be worth learning about. And I did cover them way back in the day in the podcast, episodes 10 and 11, but I didn't think those were my best interviews. I felt like those interviews were maybe a little bit one-sided, so I did want to re-explore pensions. But if you're looking for a refresher on the individual pension plan, you can go back to episode 10. And then we also talk a little bit today about RCAs, the Retirement Compensation Arrangement. We touch on it, but if you're interested in learning about the RCA, you can go back to episode 19. But the reason I'm re-exploring pensions today, I wanted to dive into, how are contributions calculated? How is the defined benefit actually calculated? I wanted to pick my guest's brain on some of the nitty-gritty that the actuaries do behind the scenes to better understand these products. And I really wanted to get a good grasp of who can truly benefit from these products and when can these people benefit from these products. And I also wanted to get some more insight into how do we navigate the pension landscape, because this is not an area that is talked about all that frequently. So here is a quick introduction on pensions. Please listen to this before going on to the rest of the interview, because nothing will make sense today without hearing this introduction. So we are going to be referring to the IPP today, the individual pension plans. This is a defined benefit plan that is available for incorporated professionals. You have to be incorporated and you have to have been paying yourself salary, so T4 income. It's really only relevant for people once they are at least 40 years of age. And the contributions, how are they determined? Well, it's based on the salary that you've been paying yourself and also the number of years of service that you have put into your corporation. So the money goes from the corporation into the pension plan, and that money is a tax deduction for your corporation. Whatever is in the pension, whatever it is invested in, that is going to grow tax sheltered. Now, this is not the type of thing for people who want to hold on to 2, 3, 4, or 5 stocks, a handful of stocks. There have to be a certain number of investments inside a pension. These are the diversification rules that a pension must follow. So the expected rate of return in a pension is 7.5%. And this is basically determined by actuaries. And if the pension underperforms, this can create some special top-up payments that your corporation can then make into the pension, and that can result in additional tax deductions for your corporation. You can also income split through a pension with your spouse. Now, pensions, though, they do come with a cost. These are costs to set up the pension and maintain the pension. And then this is not exactly a DIY product. So inside the pension, what you are investing in, typically there will be investment management fees. So to help me better understand pensions, I have Jason Pereira on the show today. So Jason is a financial planner who has lived and breathed topics related to financial planning for more than 20 years. In that time, he's become a recognized writer, commentator, speaker, podcaster, teacher, and expert in the areas of financial planning, practice management, and fintech. He's also obtained 2 degrees, 9 professional designations, and been nominated for or won over 30 industry awards. And he's produced more than 100 articles, podcasts, and interviews. Jason is all over the media. You can follow him on any social media platform and also at jasonpereira.ca. Jason also runs two very successful podcasts. The one that I do enjoy listening to from time to time is called Financial Planning for Canadian Business Owners, and he also runs FinTech Impact. The links for all of this will be in the show notes. So with that, guys, here's my interview with Jason Pereira. But please, before you listen to our interview, back up a few minutes and please listen to my introduction on the individual pension plan. You need to have this in place before going on to the interview. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Hey, Jason, welcome to Beyond MD. I really appreciate you making time for us today. Why don't you start off by just telling us a bit about what you do?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a financial planner. I basically handle my firm, Woodgate Financial, does what we'll refer to as family office services for people in the $1 to $15 million investable asset range is typically where we play within. And that is basically everything from the conventional financial planning, investment insurance, tax and estate planning to beyond that. I myself specialize in dealing with business owners and and cross-border cases. So usually very complex cases, whereas my business partner and my associate tend to deal more with individual families, people transitioning retirement, and a lot of incorporated professionals.
Okay, great. We're going to be talking a bit about pensions today. So pensions is a term, it's getting a bit more attention, and I know you are quite knowledgeable in this space. So maybe just kick it off with defined benefit versus defined contribution pensions. Maybe just go over some basic definitions for us first.
So I think the giveaways in the name, right? So defined contribution, an employer basically, or whoever is sponsoring it, will basically define how much money goes in the contribution. There's no guarantee of what comes out of it. And basically, these are the more conventional group plans like group RSPs, but when they're a pension, there's an obligation to fund it. So it's different than a group RSP. So the employer is committing to it. So a defined contribution plan is like an RSP, quite honestly. Money goes in, you manage the investments, you're responsible for what comes out of it, right? Defined benefit, on the other hand, is more like a government pension people are used to, which is I work for a number of years, I earn up a certain amount of credit, I'm entitled to a guaranteed income for life based on, well, from the guaranteed, quote unquote, based on whoever's sponsoring it. And I know what's coming out of it. The benefit is defined versus the contribution is defined.
Okay. So an IPP, the individual pension plan, that's one that more people are familiar with. And I'm wondering if you could just go over the basics on how is the defined benefit inside an individual pension plan for a corporation calculated?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say it's that well recognized, but an IPP is different than a conventional defined benefit pension plan. And an individual pension plan is permissible under the tax code and allows any company to set up a defined benefit plan for an individual who is employed by the firm. Now, in practice, because you got to be fair and equitable with different classes of employees, this is typically only ever done for business owners or incorporated professionals. Because the reason is that effectively, unlike a large pension through the government or some other sponsor, those people that organization is on the hook to make sure the guaranteed benefit's paid. And they have to swallow any risk of getting the numbers wrong, whether that be the returns that they earn or whether that be longevity or any other number of metrics, right? So basically, when you do an individual pension plan, you are the sponsor. It's all on you. And if you fall short, big deal, no issue. But so what happens is that unlike a normal RSP contribution, where you have a set amount, or a defined contribution one where you have a set amount that can go in, the defined benefit, what it does is it calculates, the IPP is it calculates basically what your contribution should be based off of your years of service times 2% times your average 5 years last, or your best 3 or 5 years earnings, depending on the formula used. And what it does is it's telling you, okay, you worked this year, this is how much income this pension should pay you. And then the actuaries work that back based on an assumption of 7.5% rate of return. And they tell you, in order to fund that, here's the contribution you have to make, right? So They give you a schedule. So here's the thing. In practice, an IPP doesn't really make sense for anyone under the age of roughly around 40 to 42. And the reason is because at that point, when you do the math on all this, assuming that they're earning the maximum pensionable earnings for the pension, what would happen is that the amount they can contribute to an RSP or DC plan exceeds what they can contribute to a defined benefit plan. So if my goal is to get the most amount of money into a plan, an RSP or DC plan might be better. Now, if I start this later, around age 40 something, the way that these things come together is that when you put one of those together, they count all the years you worked for the company before, And they calculate a couple things. Assuming you had been a part of the plan the entire time, a defined benefit plan the entire time, how much money would be in the pension? And what they say is, okay, let's just say that number is $300,000. Well, based on what your RSP should be at, your RSP currently contains 220,000 of that. You're going to have to transfer 220,000 of your RSP, because that would have been money that went in the pension if you had a pension instead, into the pension. And then there's 80,000 left. That is a contribution you can make as a lump sum to top up to where you should be. And then what happens is going forward, your contributions into the pension are higher than that under a DC plan or under a RSP. So what happens is that over time, you're typically able to contribute about 30% more on average to a pension than you would to the alternative. However, I say about 30%. Again, that depends on, it could be more, because the other thing is that if the markets fail to perform to 7.5, and if you look at any of the assumptions being put out for forward returns by BlackRock, Vanguard, any of the big associations, markets are expensive right now. No one's estimating 7.5% right now. So odds are so if you don't hit that performance, you can contribute to top up for the lack of market performance, giving you even bigger deductions and having a bigger nest egg than you would under an RSP or TFSA or RSP.
Okay, so I just want to summarize here. No. I just want to make sure I understand. That was great. So on average, if you are at the right age, inside an IPP, you're saying that the contributions on average ballpark would be 30% more than the alternative, which is
over the lifetime, the total amount you'll get into it should be roughly about 30% more. That's typically the number you end up seeing.
I gotcha. You mentioned the age at which it may make more sense to start something like this, 40 to 42. My question, Jason, is there any benefit to waiting a little bit longer, perhaps starting a little bit later, and then just making up for those past years of service and minimizing the fees along the way? Is there any rationale to that?
Well, I mean, the fees. So, I mean, realistically, depending on the vendor you're using, this is probably going to cost you sub $2,000 a year, right? So the question becomes, is sub $2,000 plus a little bit more complexity in terms of the filings you got to do, like you have to fill out more paperwork every year. I mean, it's really not a big deal. I manage a number of these on behalf of clients, and I fill out forms a couple times a year. It takes me a couple minutes, get them to sign some stuff. So there's a little bit more administration. Would you pay an extra $2,000 a year to get X percent more in your retirement savings? Is the way to look at it, right? That's the trade-off. So, if you weren't earning really good money for a long time, let's say, for example, and your past service contribution to get you up to where you should be is only $15,000. Let's just say that, right?
Yeah.
And the amount that your RSP you got to put in over your RSP for the year is $3,000. Is it worth paying $2,000 to get $18,000 more in today? The answer is probably not, right? Whereas if you wait, it could be bigger. Now, also, you could maybe you don't have the cash flow now to take advantage of the past service, whatever else it is. That's fine. You can wait. Now, the reality is that the good thing about this is that when they calculate all this, because you weren't a member of any pension plan, and they use the math on essentially how long you were working and basically what you were earning, the reality is that you'll still that past service number just keeps growing. So the lump sum you get to do it to set this thing up, the longer you wait, gets bigger and bigger. Now, that being said, that's being financed from cash flow, not from returns, right? So it's good that it's bigger. It's a bigger deduction. But at the same time, it's because you're making up for you're having to make up for the money you didn't earn from investing. So if you're sitting on a large pile of money and the math looks good and it's saying, hey, I can get an extra $80,000 to $100,000 in my retirement savings just in year one, and then I'm going to be ahead thereafter, then it starts to make sense. If, on the other hand, you don't have the money to do that lump sum and you're just going to be able to fund just a little increment on the RSP, then that's not worth it. Or if the past service is very slender, then it might be worth waiting.
Okay, let's take everything you've kind of said there. You've already given us a few nuggets on who the ideal candidate would be. So a lot of professionals listening today, especially a lot of physicians. So the question will be, in your eyes, like, who is the ideal candidate to consider an IPP, and then maybe who should avoid it? I know you've kind of hinted at this a little bit already.
Yeah, no, it's so the ideal candidate is typically someone at least in their 40s, if not older, who's earned, it's not top bracket income. I can't remember the maximum pensionable earnings this year, or something like 170-ish. But there's a threshold to which you don't get any more pension credit. So you've basically got a history of earning money at or above that threshold, and at the same time you have the funds to fund the thing, and the surplus, the numbers, and you've been working for the company long enough that the past service is built up. That's kind of ideal. Like ideally is like, hey, this $2,000 contribution or expense I'm making early on, or whatever the cost is. Look, the additional room from day one just makes it worthwhile, right? So that's where the ideal person is. Of course, they have to be incorporated, and typically, you want it to, before it used to be, depending on the province, some still do this. It used to be that you had the pension sponsor was obligated to make all contributions to keep the company up to where it should be every 3 years. So if markets underperformed, you have to make the contribution. So it was pretty restrictive. Now there was ways out of that. You could always like write to the regulator and basically ask for a pause on that. You can change your income. You can change your income from income to dividends. There was always ways around that. Lots of ways. Mm-hmm. But the reason I'm saying this is that you would typically only do it if you're the business owner, because you don't want to have that obligation to an employee, right? You wouldn't want, even if they're a key employee, like I don't want to be on the hook for their retirement savings not basically performing. So typically, again, business owners over 40, good income history, cash available. That's what we're looking for. Also, having already maxed out their RSP, right? Because maybe they haven't done anything in RSPs, right? Maybe they've been investing in their business and they're 42 years old and they've got $400,000 in RSP room. Okay, great. Use that first. Once that's funded, let's talk.
Okay. So take advantage of the RSP first, generally speaking. Is there a income threshold like below which somebody should just be like, you know what, this is probably not going to make a lot of sense, just for guidelines?
So interestingly enough, surprisingly, even at lower incomes, the past service with enough years can actually be quite reasonable, right? So what I mean by that is, the calculations are done also factoring inflation of earnings, but the actuaries will basically give you a quote as to say, look, based on your history of earnings dating back as far as 1990 for the company, which is as far back as they can go, your past service is X. They will do these quotes for free. So even if you say, look, I wasn't making $170,000 for the last 10, 15 years, I was making like 30 grand at one point, whatever it was, it still might make sense for you. So I won't say no, because at the end of the day, it depends on the entirety of your income pattern. I think you have nothing to lose by requesting a quote. And when you get a quote, you can see for yourself if it's worthwhile. Now, the one other caveat here, let's be clear. This is taxable T4 income. Dividends do not count. Dividends do not create RSP room, do not create pensionable earnings, and also do not contribute to CPP, right?
Right.
And it's an entire separate subject as to why you should be, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others who've done the math on this and done studies on this, should be taking income as a business owner over dividends. First and foremost, I will tell you, oftentimes what people think are tax savings is nothing other than contributions to CPP not being made. There's a lot of reasons why a business owner would want a candidate pension plan.
I listened to your last episode on that, on your podcast with Arvind. I thought it was quite good and quite eye-opening. I think there's a lot of pieces there that maybe people aren't thinking about. So thanks for that. One thing I forgot to ask about, Jason. So let's say you have a business owner who is living on requiring $200,000 of income to live today. When the IPP pays out later in life, is there a ceiling in terms of the benefit that can be paid out?
So when you get to retirement age, right? The plan is basically designed to pay out a certain amount, but you don't have to listen to that. You have choices. You can deregister the plan. So deregistering the plan will basically move a large portion of it to a locked-in RSP. And then basically it falls under our locked-in RSP rules where when you start taking money out, when it's unlocked as a LIF, what will happen is that there's a minimum amount you have to take every year and there's a maximum you can take. So there are restraints. But then there's another portion, and that portion is taxable. And that portion that's taxable, once you have that after-tax money, you can do with that whatever you wish, and you can consume it whatever way you want to. The alternative is you keep the pension going. Now, oftentimes the majority of these pensions do not keep going in retirement, because the question comes down to why would a company still want to have an obligation to the retired person, right?
Right.
The answer is that person's still working in the business and running the business and owns it. Or just owns it, period. I've seen it done where cases where clients have said, look, I'm just going to give my business to my kids, but I want a salary for life. Well, you can't really take a salary for life. You can take dividends, but the pension's a smarter way of organizing an income stream for them, because then the company could just basically just cut checks not for dividends, but only to top up the pension when necessary due to poor performance, right? So there's not that many cases where you would necessarily keep the pension going on. That is completely situationally specific and dependent on the individual. More often than not, they're wound down. Now, people will say, well, why would I do this only to pay a big tax bill on a 6-figure sum in the end? And the answer is because you'd still have more saved for retirement than you would under the alternative scenario. But here's to go really to your question in terms of supporting someone with $200,000 of income. Look, the reality is that the pension's a pool of assets. Supporting your retirement lifestyle is going to be a multi-bucket effort, right? It comes down to, what does the financial plan say you should be doing in saving to support the lifestyle you want? The pension will play a role in it. Could it play the entirety of the role? Theoretically, it could, depending on the fact pattern and the situation of the individual. Could it be nowhere near enough? The answer is entirely yes. And in very few cases will you get a case where you have someone with an IPP that's ongoing and being funded on a regular basis where there isn't a large corporate surplus on top of that. So really, the IPP is a tool amongst several tools that we use to plan for people's retirement. Okay.
I know one of the other tools that comes up is the retirement compensation arrangement, but I attended a talk last year. The big picture message, I'm kind of paraphrasing, is that generally speaking, unless you are an athlete or you're moving away, the RCA isn't a tool that is that commonly used. Do you agree, disagree? What am I missing there?
Look, no, the RCA is like a Swiss Army knife. It can be used in so many different ways. So one of them is typically and to explain the RCA, here's how it works. It's another program. It's another compensation agreement that gets entered into with an employee, or employer can do it with them. Business owner can do it themselves. And the way it works is when you cut a check, there's an amount that's basically can be paid to this that's well and above what the normal pensions can. It's based on an earnings formula. Point is that when you cut a check to this, 50% goes to an investment account, the retirement compensation agreement. 50% goes to the government in a prepaid tax account called the RTA,
refundable tax account.
Refundable tax account. Thank you. I was stumbling on refundable tax account. So basically, the way to look at it is you've basically you're pretty much almost neutral, because if you're top bracket, you're 53.53, you get to keep 50 cents in the dollar. At this point, you're basically almost neutral. That money sits with the government at 0% interest. Your money gets invested in the RCA, and every year 50% of gains goes to the RTA. But the benefit is that when you retire and you stop working and you start taking money out of this, and you take $1 out of the RCA, $1 gets refunded 50 cents gets refunded from the RTA to the RCA. So you're getting money back from the government. And now when you took that dollar becomes fully taxable to you. So if you're at a lower bracket than if you were top bracket when you're contributing at 53, and you're say at 30 when you're retired, now the delta has benefited you. Now, but here's the key. Okay, a couple of considerations. This works really well with athletes retiring in tax-friendly jurisdictions that have a tax treaty with Canada, because then only the withholding tax of 15% may apply, right?
Right.
15 or 25, depending on the situation. So that may be the one thing. Now, so that works really well with athletes. We're seeing it very commonly in the NBA and all over the place. But it is a Swiss Army knife. So I've seen cases like we see it commonly in what are known as supplemental employment retirement plans. So executives, where the company doesn't want to set up a pension, but they want to fund something in addition to the normal retirement pension, they will use, there's two ways to do it. Either an unfunded SERP, which basically is just a guarantee we'll keep on paying you while you're alive, or a funded SERP, where we fund money into this thing and then it's yours when we go away. Also, I wrote an article years ago on how these can be used in severance packages to basically take in money and then spread out, instead of paying all that tax in 1 year, spread out the income over multiple years. It can be used very creative in a lot of interesting ways. But I would say that where it's really beneficial is when that money is going to be used over, when those withdrawals are going to be made over a low tax period, and typically not that it's been compounding for 20 years, because you're technically growing at half the rate you could be, say, not half the rate. You're technically growing. If your other alternative is a holding company, the holding company is holding on to 85 cents on the dollar. You're losing 50 cents on the dollar here. If you can, really what this is it's a time shifting mechanism. So if you can do it and basically load this thing up, and then a couple years later start pulling it out when you have no other income, you can be way ahead.
Interesting. So you talked about athletes, executives. Are you seeing professionals like doctors, lawyers, accountants even benefiting from the Swiss Army knife RCA, or not so much?
Its value proposition is less easy to wrap your head around and understand than the IPP. right? It's like you get a deduction, it's tax sheltered, taxable coming out. It's like an RSP. It's like a large RSP. You get it. When you start going into like the mechanics of this, it loses some people. So it's definitely not as favorable. It definitely doesn't work in as many places, right? So it can absolutely work with incorporated individuals. Like, you know what? I don't have one. I may not have one. I may use one in the future, but I may not have one for a long time until such time as there's more definition around my retirement, and there was more definition around the timeline, and there's more money to basically pump into these things. And I can see an opportunity to say, hey, I can shift income from now until later when I have, maybe I'm going to retire at, maybe I retire at 50, at 60, and I have 10 years before I start CPP and OAS, and I unlock my pension day one, right? So I don't have to take anything until age 70. I'm not obligated to take anything. So I get this 10-year gap to fund. I have, what's a great resource? A tax bill with a tax return with zero income, because then I can start taking out income in other places and basically realize. So who knows? Maybe I'll use one down the road.
Interesting. Can I ask though, do you have an IPP?
I am, so age is giving it away. I am just into the stage where it actually makes sense. I'm a little bit beyond that age. And also, again, business incentives. Like I did some acquisitions. So the IPP is not in place, but will be set up very shortly.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about, I just want to get the facts straight here. The IPP versus the PPP. Is there a difference? And if so, what are the differences?
Yeah. One is a trademark. So look, the PPP, the now physician's pension plan, the family pension plan, here's the reality of what's happened, okay? The IPP has been around for a long time. Basically, and going back to the early days of it, there was at least one vendor who included the option for a DC component to the pension plan, and multiple very known, trusted actuarial firms offer this option. What happened was someone came along and decided that they were going to market that this was a separate thing and call it the personal pension plan. They trademarked PPP, if I remember correctly. Either one or the other. They trademarked either the name or I think they trademarked either the name or the acronym. And they basically have said, this is different. Here's why it's better. It is exactly the same thing. Exactly. So unfortunately,
keep going.
What the crux of the argument is that this DC component solves for all these problems, and it makes it something better for everyone as early as 18 years old. And a lot of the sales points that are made are edge cases, incredible edge cases. What 18-year-old needs to worry about maxing out their RSP? Never mind the fact that they probably, they've also got the FHSA, the TFSA, probably want to buy their own, and they're 18 years old. Like put that aside, okay? So realistically, when someone would normally look to do this in life, or would, at what stage do even successful doctors or whatever else have the lifestyle established they want to have established, their RSPs maximized, their TFSAs maximized, their house purchase.
It's a lot later. It's a lot
later, right? It's a lot later. So that's the first thing. And they'll say, one of the things he'll commonly say is you get this double up RSP strategy because you get to contribute double in the first year. Look, the reason that's the case is because DC plans get access to the RSP limit for the next year 1 year early. So it's always so the way DC plan, the day I join it, I have the room. RSPs, I get this year's room based on last year's income. So there's always a retroactive look back.
Yeah.
So that's true. But here's the thing. If I've got to pay $2,000 per year to get access to one contribution of RSPs earlier, that's it. Be 1 year ahead on this. That extra $2,000. So what's the limit this year? It's I always forget because it changes every year. It's like $30,000.
Yeah, I think it's 31,650 around there, 560. Right. Yeah.
So let's just say it was three. I'm just going to round off the numbers, make it an easier number. It's a little bit lower. I will say I'm cheating on this a little bit. Actually, I'll make it simple. So basically, if it was $3,000 on $30,000 of contribution we'd be getting earlier, that's basically the equivalent of 10%, right? Really, so it works out to basically about 6% of the amount when you think about it, right? $2,000. So would you buy an investment that in addition to the base fees you're paying also has a 6% fee? No, you wouldn't, right? So the cost to get access to that amount early makes it irrelevant, quite honestly. Why would you do that, right? It sounds good in theory, but when you actually look at the performance drag that those fees will add, now you're worse off. And here's the other thing. The years in which you contribute to the DC plan, you don't qualify for the past service for a DB plan. So you're actually reducing the amount you could be getting later. Now, if you grow at 7.5% or more, then you're going to do better. But again, markets are not exactly cheap. when BlackRock's telling you that, and Vanguard are telling you to expect like 5 points on the S&P 500 going on U.S. stocks going forward for the next 10 years, that is a telling sign that, it's going to be hard to beat that number. Even if you're not on 100% equity, it's even harder. So the reality is that, look, a lot of what is marketed, first off, let's just be clear. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And don't get me wrong, some IPPs do not have a DC option in their text, but you know why? Because they can't find a practical application except for edge cases where it ever comes in handy. So to them, it just doesn't make actuarial sense, and they don't want to put it. They don't put it in there. They could. It's just a line of text. Whereas there are several others who provide the solution as an IPP, not under some made up name that they trademarked.
I may be missing something here, Jason. One of the ways that this was explained to me was, let's say you have a pension plan that has a defined benefit and a defined contribution component. Yeah. The way things were kind of explained was, okay, inside the DB component, the defined benefit component, maybe stuff all your fixed income there. What if it returns lower? The actuaries will go in there, do a calculation, and that will allow for more surplus funding. Is that correct?
Yeah, but that's just an old trick. That's an old trick. Like, look, that's asset location, right? Like, look, at the end of the day, we can do the same thing. I can do the same thing with my corporate surplus, right? I can overweight stocks in my corporate surplus and overweight bonds in my fixed thing. All you're doing is trying to engineer that you miss the 7.5. That trick's been around long before the PPP was a thing, right? So frankly, that's just, and also let's also take a step back. What is your target asset allocation in general? Does it even make sense to do that given the size of those assets? Am I really late? Am I letting the tail wag the dog here? I want to get a bigger deduction, but I'm going to sacrifice my long-term return if it's below my risk tolerance? That doesn't make any sense, right? Yeah. So there's a lot of, at the end of the day, my description is this, okay? My analogy is this. I'm going to come out with a new product because the RSP is garbage. The RSP is a terrible thing for business owners. So my product is a plan that allows for tax deducted contributions, tax sheltering while in there. There's provisions for buying your first home, and there's provisions for re-education going back to school later on in life. It is exactly the description of an RSP, but I call it the super RSP, and I've trademarked it, and only I offer it. That is what's going on with these alternative plans.
Okay, so when it comes to overall structure, and also the other question I had was in terms of the amount that you can put into the pension, my understanding is there really is no difference.
They're all under the same actuarial rules, so tell me how you could possibly do more in one than the other. I mean, I've seen these ridiculous charts where they say you can do this versus the IPP. How is that possible when they're identical? The math is identical.
So now in terms of if somebody is interested in an IPP, navigating the pension landscape, making sure that what they're going to get is going to be a good product and good service, what kinds of key questions should we be asking? Because sometimes it's hard to know where to start.
Look, I don't think you want anyone who's sensationally targeting something. I mean, physicians in particular, you guys get targeted for everything, right? The fact that someone's basically gone out and done a PPP as specifically rebranded for physicians as if it's something that was designed for you guys, it wasn't designed for you guys. It's being marketed to you guys. That's it. There's nothing that makes it for physicians, right? It's the same kind of product everybody else can get. So the reality is that who should you be dealing with? I would talk to multiple parties, not simply to one. I would specifically look for, I'm going to name three, I'm going to drop three names of the three, what I believe are the three of the trusted, three or four names of firms that have been around for a long time. In particular, I've got my preferences, but I'll let people decide for themselves. GBL Inc., West Coast Actuaries, LMC Actuaries, and then Buck Consulting as well. Like all of those have basically done pensions for a long time. They're not going to sell you any kind of smoke and mirrors. They haven't rebranded anything. Some of them offer ones with DC plan options. Some of them don't. The costs are all pretty similar, right? And here's what the thing, and I'll tell you right now, any one of those guys that you're listening to, bashing the IPP in favor of whatever they branded, go the opposite direction.
Okay.
They're trying to create differentiation in an undifferentiated market through basically marketing.
What was the last one you mentioned after LMC? I missed that.
A Buck.
Buck. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
So I think we've kind of answered the question, okay, an IPP versus just sticking to an RRSP with maybe a spousal RRSP tacked onto it and keeping things simple, or maybe unless there's something missing in that comparison, Feel free to add some color, Jason.
No, I mean, it used to be that RSPs didn't come with great credit protection. They're credit proof now. Like there's except for the most recent contributions. It comes down to skies. It comes down to two things: A, you can get more into them, and B, you can't top up an RSP because the market performed poorly, right? So that's the other mechanism. So overall, larger corporate deductions, more money stored away for your retirement, and again, the ability to top up based on market performance.
What do you think of in light of the new proposals for hiking the capital gains inclusion rate, investing inside a corporation, and considering an IPP? Like, have IPPs in light of these new proposed changes become more interesting to you? I'm curious on your take.
I mean, look. Anyone who was a candidate for one previously probably should have been doing one, right? Does this make it more attractive? I mean, it's slightly, yes. I'll make some comments about the entire thing. First off, the regulation. So because there's no $250,000 taxed at only 50% inclusion in a corporation, they broke something called integration. Integration was the principle that if you make money in a corporation, you should be the same position if you do it personally. So that's broken now, which creates a problem for tax planning. So first off, there's still an advantage in having a corporate surplus stay in a holding company and invest it because you'll have more dollars invested and you'll grow faster.
Agreed. Yep.
The capital gain, though, the problem here is that now capital gains are going to be taxed at 2/3 inclusion from day one. I mean, frankly, if you're doing the smart thing when it comes to investing, you're probably in something passive, low turnover already, and you're deferring the gain for a very long time. If you're actively trading, well, you're not listening to the evidence there, but nevertheless, you're going to pay more. The other piece, so basically, the passive investor in it paying the 2/3 eventually. If they're if they have the same asset allocation within the corporation, you're probably within the IPP. Look, they both make sense, right? And you're not, again, it's never one or the other. You're not doing the IPP because you don't want to have a corporate surplus. You're typically using both vehicles, right? So does it make it more attractive? Sure. The other thing I will also say is that I'm sure you probably covered concepts of like capital dividend account and whatnot. So for those who don't know, the non-taxable portion of your gain in a capital gain in a corporation qualifies for what's known as a capital dividend account credit, where your account can file a return and you can pull that money out tax-free. I will say now, if you have any of that, you are better off extracting that annually and investing personally. And the reason is because personally, you have the $250,000 threshold of capital gains, 2/3 with half inclusion versus 2/3. If you can get the money out of your corporation tax-free to invest it personally, you are going to be better off versus leaving it in the corp.
I think that's very sound. Jason, you talk with a lot of smart people. You work with a lot of professionals. In your experience, what are some of the common mistakes people are making with their money?
So we're going to, people's a big term. We want to talk about business owners and corporate professionals, doctors.
I'm talking about, professionals, doctors, business owners.
Okay. So business owners in general, I think forget about corporate professionals. Business owners will often outgrow their accountant very early. And most accountants will not say, you know what, you're too complex for me. They'll just stick around and eventually get fired. So that's one thing. And oftentimes they will, accountants will put in place simplistic corporate structures that in the end may need to be redone if you're going to take advantage of lifetime capital gains exemption. So what I'm really getting at is oftentimes by the time they get proper advice, and what I mean by proper advice, if you're working with the planner at all, it should be someone who takes a 50,000-foot view of your entire 5,000, whatever number, view of your entire life and understands corporate structure and can say, okay, look, based on what you want to do out of life, based on what you own, based on the money coming in here, look, if we should do the following to like freeze your corporation, protect your assets, maximize the lifetime capital gains exemption, multiply that, and put in place a structure that is basically that's got the view of it. Because the accountant files your taxes. Too often people think the accountant's there to basically do tax planning for you. The reality is that they're not compensated for that, right? They get blamed if it goes wrong. So where's the incentive? And this is why you don't get, so don't get me wrong. I met many accountants who are great at tax planning, but the average one does next to nothing on it other than year-to-year returns, okay? Getting, the lawyer you only talk to when you need something. And frankly, maybe they're hired gun to fix something one time. But having a trusted financial planner in the middle who basically understands all aspects of your life and coordinates those efforts and optimizes the entire thing, too much is made about the industry and what they charge in fees. look, it's valid if that person is doing nothing other than placing your investments or playing day trader with your investments. That's not something you should be paying for. There is a value to proper implementation of investing, but frankly, you can do that at a robo for like 25 basis points. If anyone's going to charge you more than that, they better be providing some comprehensive services for that, especially to business owners. Now, I will warn. I'm going to make a comment about doctors. Trigger warning here, particularly the male ones. There's generally a running joke and understanding, I'm probably sure you heard of it, of the doctors who basically will spend every last penny they make, right? And unfortunately, I have seen this too many times. I'm going to share an interaction I had with one doctor who's actually he's actually pretty good at this, and we got him to where his savings are doing well and he's doing great. But I remember one time getting into an argument where basically, we did it. They wanted a financial plan to do all this stuff, and we ended up doing the financial plan saying you can't do any of this stuff. And kind of he said to me, "I'm getting tired of you telling me I can't do things." I'm like, look, you can do whatever you want. You're asking me, does it work? If you want permission for me to say if it doesn't work, I'm not going to tell you that. And he's like, I don't understand. I see all my friends I work with doing all this stuff, and you're telling me I can't afford it. I said, well, you don't know that your friends aren't one paycheck away from bankruptcy. Well, that's ridiculous. Well, I make, I'll pick a number. I'm not going to give it away. I make $500,000 a year. I looked him dead in the eyes. I said, no, you don't. You make $250,000. And he looked at me. He's like, what are you talking about? I said, by the time the feds are done, you're making a little bit more than $250,000. And he stopped and he realized that he'd been mentally spending that difference, right? And I think when he reframed it, and this is not the only time I've had a conversation. I'm not going to pick on doctors with this. I've had lots of high income earners. That was where basically I make X. Okay, you're telling me I can't have this chalet. That's right. Well, and then they can spout off about the government afterwards if they want, but I think there's something that really changes in people's minds when they anchor themselves not around the top line, but the bottom line. Mm-hmm. When they anchor themselves around the bottom line, and here's the thing, for the average employee, most of them anchor on the bottom line. You'd be amazed how many employees can't tell me what their gross income is. Yeah. They have no clue. They know what shows up in their bank account every month. That's it. Yeah. They know, right? They don't know. Like I've literally sat across from people and said, okay, how much do you make? And they're just kind of like, they almost feel embarrassed because they don't know. Well, this is what I get paid every 2 weeks. Okay, what is that before taxes? Right. So, but when it comes to incorporated professionals and business owners, we're used to dealing in gross dollars, right? And too often the number is framed around what came into the account.
Right.
Never mind the feds got paid. Never mind the expenses came out. Never mind that. Never mind that there's a tremendous amount of friction. Framing around what you're actually taking changes your entire perception.
So you run a number of podcasts, Jason, and I know one is focused on finance and tech. So I'm curious, like what kind of positive changes do you foresee or hope for when it comes to what could happen for financial planning for Canadians in the coming years?
Yeah, I mean, look, I will say, unfortunately, the Canadian industry is 20 years behind the American one. And most of the Canadian advisors don't take the time to learn about what I mean by that. They just hear it and just like, oh, whatever. Look, there's a number of reasons why I think the Canadian industry is atrophied. One is bank dominance, and lack of competition. As a whole, we take a lot of solace in having these large institutions, but at the same time, then we take their word for it as to that their service is good, and it's actually terrible and it costs too much. They pay lip service to financial planning. They don't really take it. There are good people there, but most of them don't take it seriously. At the end of the day, they're just there to basically run assets. I'd say the independent market is very much driving the alternative to that, which is planning centric. So basically, to answer your question, there's a couple of things happening. One, a greater move towards planning centricity, and that will also be helped. So let me take it one more step back. The other issue is that a lot of compensation has just been hidden. Or fees have not been fully disclosed. So some of your people may not realize this, but what shows up on a statement right now is only advisor compensation. If there's any fees associated with any of the products they're buying, ETFs, mutual funds, private funds, whatever else it is, that is not on the statements. That is in the disclosure.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yes, that is not the case. So too often we've been in competition with advisors where they're like, oh, I only charge 1%. And a client comes back to me, well, they're charging less than me. I'm like, okay, great. Show me the portfolio they're going to do. And then they come back with this mutual fund portfolio. I'm like, okay, they didn't disclose the 1.25% fees on top of that, plus HST, like 1.25% plus HST, fees that you're going to be paying on that. We're far cheaper than that. And they're like, well, wait what do you mean? Like, sometimes they just won't believe that person's lying to them. But it's true. Where oftentimes many advisors will play these shenanigans where they're not disclosing. They're saying, look, my fee is X. They're not lying. but they're making a lie by omission by not telling you the total cost of your investing is Y, right? So the reality, now we get around that because we basically sign a disclosure once a year where we itemize everything and tell everybody where the money's going. The good news for the consumer is that is changing. That is changing December 31st of next year, where the first statements for those statements will actually show embedded cost and total cost reporting. So there's gonna be a lot of people with a rude awakening with their Q1 with their Q4 statement when they see that if they compare Q4 statements, the number will have doubled or increased. So the reality is that the lack of transparency around cost, I think, has created a lot of atrophy towards people trying to differentiate, because their differentiation for too long has been price, right? Mm-hmm. Or that's typically the thing most people poke on, right? That's what Questrade is telling you to obsess with, right? But in actuality, I think once we have more transparency, you'll have more of a need for people to develop a value proposition that is better. Right now, lots of people say they work with doctors, but what are they doing that's different than everybody else for doctors?
True.
Nothing. What, like, if anything, I think they should be saying, like, where's the niche that says I work with, for example, plastic surgeons running their own clinic, looking to exit in the next 10 years. Okay, that's interesting, because like some provinces you can sell those clinics and basically make money off that. And, you like any other business, you can optimize around the operations of those business to make them worth more. And you have to also answer the retirement question, right? So now look at that. Like, that sub niche has a truly defined value proposition and problem that an advisor could basically describe themselves as the solution for that, and actually provide value, as opposed to, I just deal with doctors. Why? Because I target them, because that's where money is. Like, that's what the average advisor will say. I deal with executives, business owners, and high net worth families. My response is, thanks for telling me you deal with people with money. What do you do different for all three of those cohorts? Go. And
it's a very valid question, Jace. Yeah.
Right. So this is my point. In the US, don't get me wrong, that stuff exists too. But I also see a big leaning into niches, into creating, and not being all things to all people, but being lots of things to small cohorts of people, whether it be those doctors or those clinics, dentists with clinics like that. There's one that I point people to all the time. Specifically, their website says, women in technology and mid-career run with families. Like, think about those shared challenges that person's able to speak to, right? Mm-hmm. Yep. My favorite one was Big Game Fisherman Champions. Like, I'm like, what? You win one of these tournaments, they hand you $500,000. You win a couple of those tournaments, people start assigning you for sponsorship contracts, right? So there's this lumpiness to income.
Yeah.
And then there's this entire, like, what's a good sponsorship contract look like? This guy's got that field nailed down. So the reality is that there hasn't been enough thinking about like, how do I create a value proposition very specific to people? We're starting to see more of that now. And I think that with greater transparency will create greater price pressure, which if the people want to maintain their 1% that they're charging, then guess what? You're going to deliver value for that. So that's the trend that I hope, knock on wood, is coming down the pipe with greater transparency in the next couple of years. Plus, a lot of the American media from that industry gets consumed by more forward-thinking advisors in this country leaning that way. Now, the technology side of it, going back to where you started here, just like a doctor, man, technology is just a tool that enables us to do our job. That's it. Maybe it's do it better, faster, and whatever. And right now, the big innovation is, of course, artificial intelligence. The reality is that, yes, the AI is going to make the amount of time I need for meeting prep and post-work just shrink. And I'm already starting to see it happen, right? It's going to happen. That efficiency means I have more time. Now, what am I going to do with that time? One of three things. I'm either going to consume it and work less. Great. If I can earn the same money, have a good lifestyle, service my clients, nothing wrong with that. But then I'm also curtailing my growth. I'm going to expand the number of clients I have. But the problem is that, frankly, we have one piece of technology that can't be upgraded. It's between our ears. I'm sure many of you listeners have heard the concept of the Dunbar number, where you can't keep more than a certain number of relationships straight in your mind.
Yep.
You take out friends, and that's usually about 150 is the number of people agree upon. Take out friends and family. That means the average advisor can have a deep relationship with maybe 100 couples, maybe.
Yeah.
Right. So if I'm going to, reality is that what it's going to do is that free time is going to allow me to basically further invest in definancial relationships with my clients beyond my current schedule, to understand them better. And this is where the fields of behavioral finance and financial therapy, which are emerging in the US, are going to play such a key role in the future, because, hey, the machine's going to tell me what's mathematically optimal, but it doesn't mean it's human optimal. So how do I basically bridge that gap? How do I get the human to the math, or how do I change the math to meet the human, or how do I create that Venn diagram where it works, and get past, help them to help understand what's actually getting in their way? What financial traumas and histories or preferences or whatever is going on in them is prohibiting them from succeeding, and either augmenting the plan to let them do what they're going to do and still succeed, or figuring out how to intervene to make sure they can have a plan that works. That's the future.
Yeah, Jason, I do think you're onto something there in terms of deepening those relationships and understanding exactly what's going on. I really do. Winding down now, I do ask all my guests this question. This is kind of a new thing, so you're my second guinea pig on this. But what is the most valuable lesson that you've learned?
So I will say it's that always be curious. All right, always be curious, because you look at, I have I got 2 degrees and I've had 10 designations at the maximum. And I always find that I'm always learning. I'm always reading. I'm always taking things in. And for every gap in knowledge that gets covered, 3 other gaps that I never knew existed appear, and I keep on going. And I still remember years ago when I would be doing the CFA or whatever else it is. And early on, people were just like, you don't need that. Like, you can, build a business without that. And then it became like, that's ridiculous. I can't believe you have 3 designations. Why would you keep on doing? You're paying a lot of money for that. And then after, I think it was the 5th designation where people would see that behind my name, and then they just stopped asking questions or telling me I was wasting my time. And suddenly they just started listening more. And then like, as it grew and grew, it was more like, holy crap. And then like, people be like, all right. And then like, it's one thing to have all that, but it's also something else to have a successful practice. And seeing that I had a successful practice, and then also basically seeing about, like, when I would speak about the cases I was working on that were beyond what they've ever seen before, like, the reality is I laddered up because I didn't accept the minimum, right? I got all the required criteria to do everything I need. I went well beyond that, right? And that journey beyond that created greater opportunities everywhere in my life, everywhere. So always be curious. And if you stay curious and passionate about the thing that you love, and I love this business because at its best version, this is about having an advocate sit across from you and ask you, what is the best, fullest version of your life that you see for yourself? How do I help you self-actualize? How do I help you get beyond that? The RSPs, the investing, all of this crap, everything. At the end of the day, it's a mechanism for you to live the life you want. Success in this industry should not be measured by returns on basis point differentials over freaking indexes. Success should be measured by, when you finally breathe your last breath, did you leave it all on the field? And did you use everything you had to live that life? And I think that I get to play a privileged role in helping people experience that to whatever degree I can. And this is the thing I want to build upon in my practice, in my career, and I want to encourage others to do. And the good news is that I'm not alone. I'm not alone. A lot of people maybe can't articulate it in this business, but they can see it. But the only way we're going to get there as an industry, the only way you're going to get that this industry gets there, and I'm sticking with this industry with this advice, but it applies to so many other fields, is to stay curious and never accept the bare minimum.
Jason, that's powerful. I was like laser focused as you were talking there. I think that message is going to resonate with a lot of people. And I can tell you, you are a passionate guy. That's why I follow you on LinkedIn. That's why a lot of people follow you, and a lot of people respect you for what you do.
It's hard to not be passionate when you can see the power of what's possible.
Yeah.
And see what people think, and see what basically those with the bare minimum who are being incentivized to do the bare minimum and hit their targets are ending up doing to people versus doing the right thing. And when you get the opposite side of it, and I'm going to beat up on Questrade, who I think is in a lot of ways done a huge disservice to Canadians, because their sole drumbeat is fire your advisor fees, fire your advisor fees, fire your advisor fees. Meanwhile, their performance hasn't been great either, and nor day trading should not be done by anyone, quite honestly. But to completely not acknowledge the existence of the value of any form of advice whatsoever is a huge disservice to people, right? Mm-hmm. The reality is that their life is hard. The world is complex. Richard Thaler said the same thing. People aren't dumb. The world is hard. And it gets more hard. Taxes change, structures change, IPPs, RCAs, all this. How do you make the most out of all this?
Yeah.
And the reality is that all of those are mechanisms to get you one in a life. So it's hard not to be passionate about things when you can see the transformational power of something and just want the industry to get its act together and get to the end state. Luckily, maybe I inspire some people to do that, but you only get what you lead by example. It's all you can do.
So Jason, where can people follow you and learn more about what you're doing?
Sure. Well, if you want to see me pick fights, that's on Twitter or x.com. Easy to find. Jason Pereira, I've been on since year one. I only really more recently did that. I'm all over social media. And I do have a personally branded site, jasonpereira.ca, as well as woodgate.com, which is my core business. Neither one of them is curated to the degree it should be, quite honestly. My website's due for a big Woodgate's due for a big update. jasonpereira.ca only keeps my podcast up to date, but honestly, I'm in the media all the time. So just follow me. Follow me on 1 or 2 conduits, you'll get it all. Just that's
okay, guys. Yeah, I mean, I think Jason is worth following. I think you'll learn something along the way each time. But Jason, thank you for making time for us today. Like it's a real pleasure to have you on. Okay.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
Okay. Take care. So I want to take a moment to share my perspectives on disconnecting. Disconnecting can be a really difficult thing to do now in the world that we live in, but I think it could be a really powerful thing, a really good thing for us. So a lot of people recently were asking me how I came up with the idea for Beyond MD, this podcast. And it all went back to that story in April 2020 when our radiology volumes in the hospital plummeted for a short amount of time. And I was the type of person, I didn't really do well sitting still. I wanted to keep doing things. I wanted to keep learning. And people who know me really well, they know that I am constantly absorbing content. If I'm out for a walk, if I'm out for a run, especially when I'm driving to work and even back home, I'm listening to a podcast. I'm listening to an interview, trying to learn something on the go. Recently, I had a conversation with my dad and he stopped me and he said, Yathin, you're always doing something. You're always on the go. Next time you're out for a walk, put down the headphones and just listen to the sounds of nature. And this is one of those moments where I know you guys have all been there. You're thinking like, okay, here come my parents with the advice. And I said, okay, here we go again. But you know what? The next time I went back home to Kingston to visit my parents, I took his advice. This was back in Easter. I took my dad's advice. I went for a walk. And about halfway through my walk, I came to a site where there were probably 200 birds. And they were making this really loud noise. At first, I was thinking like, what is that noise? But then I realized it was the birds. And you know what? In that moment, I was genuinely happy. And I think I was happy because I was taking the time to free myself of distractions and to focus on some of the smaller things right in front of me. And then one thing led to another. I started to think about positive things. I started to think about all the things in my life that I'm already grateful for and that I already have, like my amazing wife, Seema, like my 2 boys, Rohan and Zion, and all the opportunities I have to network with people on my podcast and all the learning that I'm able to do. It just was a chain reaction of one positive thought after another. And in that moment, I was genuinely happy. And you know what? In that moment, I started to come up with new ideas for the podcast, for some of the other projects that I'm working on. I couldn't believe it. Here I was freeing myself of all the content absorption, and I was coming up with more ideas. So I think that when we take the time to disconnect from certain distractions, from constantly absorbing things, we're able to free our minds. We're able to focus on some of the things in front of us, the smaller things in life. We spend a little bit more time being grateful for the things that we already have. And you know what? I think that those simple practices make us happier. And if you take the time to read the book called Happier by Tal Ben-Shahar, who I've referenced on this podcast before, he has ample evidence in the book that shows that when we are happier, that is when we are in our best creative state. That is when we are coming up with our best ideas. So it's really counterintuitive at first, but if you take the time to free yourself from distractions and you give your mind that space, I think that's when you can come up with your best ideas. Give it a shot. Let me know what you think. Thank you as always for joining me, and we'll see you in about 3 weeks. Stay well, stay savvy.